it up. It's The Record Machine with your host, Jimmy Howell.
On the rocks in the spray, a beautiful view, such a perfect day, made for me and you. Water's cold and clear, everything feels brand new. And by the way, I'm so in love with you. When I stood on the shore, I think you know why we had to go back for more. You didn't think I had it in my heart to fall in love with you, and everything you say and everything you do. The saltwater summers forever on my mind. We just found paradise as the day starts to unwind. Saltwater summers, it's our movie on this beautiful beach. The hill, there's a band, we walk in the sand and now we're traveling home, and you've lost your way. I don't say a word, I keep this moment sustained. Such a perfect day, the rocks in the spray, I see you fall asleep. Such a perfect day. The saltwater summers forever on my mind. Like we just found paradise as the day starts to unwind. Those saltwater summers, it's our movie on this beautiful beach. On the hill there's a band, we walk in the sand and fine, fine. Such a perfect day. Such a perfect day. Aw, man, such a perfect day.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome record producer, film director, TV host, and writer, Joe Viglione to the program. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Now, you can hear me fine?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Excellent.
So where are you calling from today?
I'm calling from Malden, Massachusetts. 2 feet of snow all around my house.
Wow. When did that start?
They're going to plow it like in a few hours, I guess.
Uh-huh. So when did that start?
Started Friday night.
Wow. So you've been snowed in ever since Friday?
Yeah. I pick up vinyl on Friday nights. I have tons of vinyl. And so, like, I had the garage all ready. I unloaded the car, and everything was fine Friday night around 8 o'clock. It started happening around midnight, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, well, hopefully they'll start plowing everything, and you can get back to normal business, right? You got some appointments this week, I think, right?
I have Moonfall, that new movie coming out. What's the name? Roland Emmerich, right? He does all those disaster movies.
Okay.
So Moonfall, for us reviewers, it's... I think it's Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Usually they're 2 in the afternoon or 7 at night.
Mm-hmm.
You never know. And so I'm looking forward to that. But it really takes a majority of the day to get into Boston, see the movie, and then you get an embargo. I don't think we can release the film review until Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
But that's coming out this weekend.
Okay. Now, you're originally from Boston your whole life?
A whole life, yep.
Wow, that's pretty cool. When did you realize that you wanted to get involved in music?
Well, that's interesting. My sister was 3 years older than me, so I was introduced to a lot of great music, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, all the stuff she'd bring home.
Mm-hmm.
And what, if she's 17, I'm like, at the time 14. So she was a major influence on my music. She would go to the Boston Tea Party and the Ark and all these great places where Led Zeppelin were playing and The Who, and they were all playing this concert club,
Mm-hmm.
legendary club. The Velvet Underground was actually house band there. A lot of people don't realize that because, New York, Boston, the proximity. So they lived in Somerville and they used to play the Tea Party quite a bit.
Wow.
If you look at the back of the White Light, White Heat cover,
Mm-hmm.
You'll see the TY, Tea Party. They're sitting under the Tea Party sign.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's how influential the Velvet Underground were in the underground, because we had a top 40 station, WRKO, and they had a Christmas party. And for a top 40 station to have the Velvet Underground at the Christmas party,
Mm-hmm.
my guitar player Fred was there. And in one of the WRKO compilations, I think with Bobby Hebb Sonny, there's a photo of the Velvet Underground, very rare in this compilation from the local music top 40 station.
Very
So
cool.
a lot of rich history.
Yeah, you sent me, over, I think it was over the Christmas break, the holiday break. You sent me a pretty decent, very cool timeline, and it looks like it starts at 1969. You said at 15 years old, you started your own magazine.
Right, Varulven, which is still the record label. All these, you have to be careful as a child when you come up with titles because they can last 50, 60 years,
Mm-hmm.
or longer. And so Varulven was a book by Axel Sandemos about a love triangle, but it means the werewolf.
Okay.
And I would cruise the bookstores in Boston at 15, 16 and buy rare books. I was really into it, as you are. It's in our blood, right? Even at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
We don't understand it, but instinctively we're picking up these great things. And Varulven, I thought, what a cool name. And so I put the magazine out where we do film reviews.
Okay.
You're talking to me today, and in 2 days I'm going to review another film, which is kind of, like I said, it carries through your entire life.
It, obviously, and I mean, I'm looking at, it says 1972, you met Alfred Hitchcock. What was that like?
That was amazing, and that's one of those things that's like branded in my brain. So there was the film Frenzy.
Mm-hmm.
And we would go see Alfred Hitchcock movies. My girlfriend and I would go to Alfred Hitchcock movies at the drive-in. And so Frenzy, it was like, I'm 18 years old, and he was at the premiere. And so there was a cake and all that stuff. But I just remember getting his autograph. He would do that little profile from the TV show.
Mm-hmm.
He'd sketch out his profile. And there was a baby in a woman's arms, and he stops doing the autographs and looks at the baby and said, "Perhaps we should put a wig on the baby's head." Then he goes back to autographing, and it's Alfred Hitchcock, so it stayed with me my entire life. I mean, I can see it right now being with Alfred. Isn't that wild?
That's very cool. I mean, that's a cool story. I mean, I remember watching the all those movies when I was a young kid, He was a scary guy, but it must have been really cool to meet him in person, right?
It's just, if you're into films, if you're into rock and roll music, having met these legends, these icons, who knew? I just knew I had to go meet them,
Mm-hmm.
and I did. And there was a very small crowd. I'd say maybe 30 people because it was the middle of the day. And, I worked for my dad, so I must have gotten the time off. I had to have. I must have said, "Dad, I got to go meet Alfred Hitchcock," right?
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, there's just like about 30 people there outside of the front of the theater. No, I'm sorry, right in the lobby of the theater, the old SAC 57, which is, I don't think it's there any longer. but it was just very cool. And I got pictures, and I put it in my magazine.
Now, besides Hitchcock, do you have any other interesting people that you met in the film business as you were doing this magazine and reviewing films and TV shows and things of that nature?
Well, the first big one was the Maysles brothers, who did Beatles Come to Ed Sullivan, and they did the Gimme Shelter.
Mm-hmm.
So I was editor at the high school paper. Another fellow actually won the lottery, but he gave it to me knowing I was a diehard Stones fan. That was very kind of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, and it was a Q&A at the Charles Street Theater, which also no longer exists.
Wow.
So here's the Maysles brothers. Here's the funny thing. My bass player, Bruce Fromke, Susan Fromke, worked for the Maysles. So years later, I'm up in the Maysles office watching outtakes of the Beatles stuff. Fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
But who knew? You know, you're in high school. You go and interview the Maysles with all these other high schools and get photos, of course. But then years later, I'm in their office because my bass player, right, his sister's writing a story on Satisfaction, the Stones song. She was there when Keith Richards was writing it at the poolside or something.
Wow.
So there's all this cool stuff that we insiders love, but the rest of the world, yeah, to them it's like, what are these people talking about? But to us, it's just fun. So years later, I got to interview Jodie Foster, and then Robert Zemeckis, the director of Contact and Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
So Zemeckis did 2 or 3 Jimmy Miller songs in the movie Flight. It was the Denzel Washington movie. We were doing the interview.
Okay.
And I was all prepared for him. It was a lot of fun. And I got to say, Mr. Zemeckis, I can tell you with certainty that Jimmy Miller would have loved the placement you did of his songs in your film. And Jimmy would. I knew Jimmy so well. We lived together practically.
Mm-hmm.
His wife would throw him out if he'd end up in my house.
Wow.
So Zemeckis did just a great job. But to meet these guys and then be able to tell them, hey, Jimmy's gone, but he would have loved what you did with the music. And Paramount got back to the publicist and said, Joe did a great job, best interview of the day. And that made me really feel good.
And you're a diehard Stones fan, it looks like, right? I mean, you've seen them a couple of times, and you were at the Boston Garden in the second row. What was that like?
Well, I paid $100 for those tickets in '72.
Wow, that's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was second row. They were arrested in Rhode Island. Mick and Keith, I think, attacked a photographer.
Okay.
And the city of Chelsea was burning. I mean, literally burning. So the late Mayor Kevin White, you can find this on YouTube somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin White, and we're there, and Stevie Wonder was brilliant. Stevie was just coming into his own with Mary Wants to Be a Superwoman when he was writing his own material and got away from, doing the pop hits and into his real soul stuff. And I'm like, boy, Stevie Wonder should play like 3 hours, right? Because we're waiting for the Stones. But he only did 45 minutes. And we're waiting in the heat, and we're waiting. And the mayor comes out on stage and said, my city's in flames. Very famous speech. And he didn't want to riot at the Garden, which he was absolutely correct, because I went and bought Led Zeppelin tickets years later, 78, 6 years later. And they let us in the Garden at midnight to buy the Zeppelin tickets, and they tore the place apart.
Wow.
The Zeppelin fans the fire hoses, they were stealing beer, they were smashing the place, and
wow.
the concert canceled.
Jeez. Now,
I did see Zeppelin in 72.
Now, you're in high school in 72, right?
I was 10th grade.
Oh, wow. So we sophomore.
No, I'm sorry. 72, I was in college.
Oh, you were in college. Okay.
Suffolk University. So 72, I was in college.
Nice.
Oh, that was great, because Suffolk was on Beacon Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote Jethro Tull review for the paper, but I would go down Beacon Hill to the Orpheum Theater. So I had front row seats on third row, Procol Harum. It was great, because between break and college, I'd just go down and buy the tickets. I'd be first in line because I was right there at college. So the big concert hall, which was about 3,000 people, or less, but it was still the big concert hall. I got to buy a lot of tickets right away. And they were $350, $450. It was very inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, David Bowie was all of $3, $2.50. RCA underwrote it, and there were only 200 people in the Lang Center.
Wow. You
The
can't even
music hall for Bowie.
get a napkin for $2.50 now.
Right, but there were only 200 people there. It was huge because they were underwriting the Ziggy Stardust tour.
Mm-hmm.
And so there would be billboards. David Bowie is Ziggy Stardust. Ziggy Stardust is David Bowie. Promo on the radio. My name is David Bowie. My name is David Bowie. My name is, et cetera, et cetera. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
They get even free Bowie records at the music stores, like his EP I have. It's probably worth a lot of money now. But they give away Bowie records. They really promoted the guy.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen by accident. And he was great. I mean, that concert was the best Bowie concert I've ever seen with 200 people. They had drag queens, and it was wild.
Oh, I'm sure. You don't see shows like that anymore.
No, and I waved to him through his limo.
Mm-hmm.
What was Star Man? That was the song on the radio. But he hadn't really got traction yet. It was all new. And I taped the show. So this guy over in Sweden has this list of all tapes of Bowie shows, and I'm in it.
Mm-hmm.
But RCA also taped the show with the big 24-track truck. So I think some of the music hall show came out on Rykodisc.
Mm-hmm.
But I have my own tape of my audience tape of it, which became very famous because he wasn't famous at the time.
Now, you said you started your magazine in 1969. When did you make that transition to a record label?
1976. Sev Grossman was in Willie Loco's band. Willie was part of the Velvet Underground at the tail end. He replaced Lou Reed, of all things.
Wow.
And Willie had nightmares of Lou because they kind of... I put out Mo Tucker's first record from the Velvet Underground.
Mm-hmm.
Because Willie had a copy on Cape Cod, and he's on the record, and George Nato on guitar, and Jonathan Richman. And they cut this "I'm Sticking With You," which came out later. So Seb Grossman from Willie's band said, Andy Mendelssohn's down the street from you. I lived in Arlington, and Andy Mendelssohn was on Arista Records. He was Andy Pratt's keyboard player. But I don't know these people. I'm kind of new to the scene, and I go in and record. This is a great story. I record with Andy Mendelssohn, Saltwater Summers, and it got me my record deal. But, I'm a novice. I walk in, and we just start recording, and we were good, and we put out a good record. But it's all unknown to me, right? It's 1976, so we go to this is great. I send it to the pressing plant, and I have the cassette with me. So I'm with the Aerosmith groupie, Suki Jones. She worked for my dad. That Back in the Saddle song, Looking for Miss Suki Jones?
Right.
And her friend Penny. And we go to Springfield to see Bowie. And we book in the hotel room, the hotel that Bowie's at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great story. So Suki goes, "There's Iggy. Go get him." Iggy Pop, right? So she pushes me into the elevator. I'm with Iggy, and I go, "You look like a friend of mine." He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Yeah, James." He goes, "I'm James." I go, "James Osterberg." He goes, "That's me." He loved that I knew who he was, right? Because he wasn't famous yet. He had the Two Stooges albums.
Mm-hmm.
He was famous in the underground, but not mainstream as Bowie was. So we're hanging out with Iggy for 3 days, right? And I play him my record. So Iggy was the first rock star to hear my record while it's at the pressing plant.
Wow.
And I did a 4-album deal with it in Europe, so I figured it had Iggy's kind of aura, osmosis or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got a picture of Iggy in that elevator I took. I got to find that somewhere in the house. But fun day. So Iggy introduced us to David. And so I'm at the bar with David, and I thanked him for his music. And then we're hanging out with David Bowie. Very cool times. That was 1976. And that's how I started the record label. In March or April, the record came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the record business, So here, almost 50 years later now, right?
You sent me a a file, an MP3 file of the Saltwater Summers, and also Can't Wait to See You Smile. What's the story behind those two songs?
Can't Wait to See You Smile. August 1987. I'm with JoJo and Denny Lane's daughter, Heidi Jo Hines. I'm in the recordings. We're recording JoJo Lane. So there's Jimmy Miller.
Mm-hmm.
We're at Normandy Sound that did the great Beaver Brown soundtrack and a lot of New Kids on the Block. Phil Green's still a friend of mine. We're friends on Facebook. So Phil Green was a guitarist in the band Swallow on Warner Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And started his own studio, Normandy Sound. And when the New Kids on the Block came out, they had 3 studios, one in Westford, they had one in Boston, and one in Rhode Island. And I was managing the one in Westford in 1988. It was all a small circle of people. So we're in there, and I'd fallen in love with someone. And I wrote this song, Transporter, Can't Wait to See You Smile. And I'm writing it in front of Heidi Jo Hines, JoJo's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, when you're really crazy about something, she's like 12 years old at the time. Now she's 40, right? It was 87.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a singer. She's on the anthology I put out. So we're all close-knit family. So I'm writing the song for her. And then Jimmy comes down, Jimmy Miller, and the Stones producer arranged it for me. I wrote it, and then Phil Green and I just recorded it right there on August, I think, 18th, 1987. Years later, I've added more instrumentation to it, and now I'm putting out an album, going back and finding the songs that I like a lot, and I'm redesigning them with Peter Kalo. He's Carly Simon's music director.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Jimmy Miller and Rob Fraboni and Peter Kalo and all these great people, and I'm really proud of this record because it's my chance to go back and make the records feel like what I want them to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Can't Wait to See You Smiles. We edited the song recently, so the edit starts off the album. And then Saltwater Summers, a friend and I went to Maine September 10th this year.
Mm-hmm.
I took about 400 photos, so I'm using all these photos. And the next week I went in and rewrote the song and re-recorded it. Peter Kalo's on all instruments. He sent the files from New York. I'm singing on it, and I'm really excited, Jimmy, because this is a chance to go back and do the songs again. So if people like the originals, fine, here's the originals.
Mm-hmm.
People like the remakes, like I do, there they are. It's not like going in and recording them. Hit artists go back in the studio and they re-record something. Aerosmith did, I think, Walk This Way for a TV commercial.
Right.
And so they re-record them their way, but they kind of copy them note for note. No, this is me reconstructing the songs.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a way different feel.
Very catchy number. I like that one, the Saltwater Summers. I've been listening to that a couple of times since you gave it to me.
Bless you. I just love it. That was the one that kind of launched my career.
Now, how many? I see that you list on here. You have a couple. How many EPs and albums do you have to date that you perform on?
Oh God, I don't know, 10, 15. I don't even count them anymore.
Oh wow!
I really should do a proper discography, but I'm so busy promoting everyone else's music. It's kind of hard.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you should do something. Maybe do like even a greatest hits or something like that.
Genya Raven said to me, "You can't put out a greatest hits if you don't have a hit."
Wow.
The best of. I did the best of Willie Loco Alexander. As I said, he was in the Velvets, and Karen Kane was the engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And the original tapes were down in North Carolina, and the producer, wonderful, wonderful guy, but he just wouldn't relinquish the tape. So Karen and I went in, and for France, for the French label, we did the best of Willie Loco, which kind of ties into Velvet Underground history. The stuff is great, but we took the pops and the crackles out, and we did a fine job. So instead of greatest hits, it's the best of Willie Loco Alexander.
Very cool.
Yeah, he's a great cult following he has worldwide, so we did our little thing for history.
Nice. Now, you had you started out with a magazine, then you did your label. I also, I'm reading this timeline that you put together. It's actually very good. It's all in chronological order. And your first radio show in '78, you talk about that. How did that come about?
Well, Brian Goslow, who now edits this Art Scope that I used to edit, see how incestuous it is here?
Mm-hmm.
Brian bought my Saltwater Summers, fell in love with it, would invite me out there to Worcester. They were in Worcester.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were on WCUW, and then he asked me to do a weekly hour-long radio show. So I did it at my home and would mail him the cassette, and it got played on the air. We did that for about a year because we were like-minded. So you find really cool stuff like Ronnie Spector B-sides and whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her newer releases. And that's the kind of stuff I'd put on the air. But then the next year I did my first TV show. So in 78 was the radio show.
Mm-hmm.
In 79 was the TV show. And I'm still doing the TV show today.
And what's the show called?
Back then it was TVI. It was these two guys, Jay Rowe, who's now one of the heads of HBO, believe it or not.
Nice.
Oh, it's a funny story. So Mark Rosenfeld and Jay Rowe were at Boston University, BU.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Rat Skeller where Suki Jones and I would hang out at the Rat, right? And across the street was New England Music City. So I went in there, and there was my record on the counter. I had it in there, and I said to Mark, he was just some college kid. I said, hey, put that song that you got highlighted, put it on the turntable. They'd have turntables in the stores. And I got on the chair and started dancing to my song and singing it, and I walk out the door. I don't say a word to the guy, right? He calls me up and said, Jay and I want to interview you. You're an interesting creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
They came down my basement, and they interviewed me. That tape's long gone, but it was probably a fun interview. These guys were go-getters, these college students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if he's at HBO now, he was a real go-getter, Jay. So they said to me, your grandmother lives in Somerville, and Somerville has public access. I go, what's that? They go, well, it's local origination TV, but if your grandma sponsors us, we'll direct you hosting a TV show. And, my grandma loves me, right? Loved me. So grandma said, sure, and we're doing a TV show. My dad said, sure, you can take 1 day off once a month, and do your show. It's Dad. He's going to say yes, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have some of the tapes, and we did this show in 1979. Public access didn't really come into vogue until around 1985. There were pockets of it in the 70s, but just pockets. And then it really kind of blossomed in 85 with whatever Congress passed. They had to give something back, and what they gave back was public access TV. So because of these college kids, because I put a record out, because I danced in this record store,
Mm-hmm.
you see the bridge of incidents, right? Leading to, wow, I'm doing a TV show.
That's very cool.
And then years later, in 1995, I called up Marty Ballin at the Jefferson Airplane.
Right.
Said, hey, Marty, I'm going to launch a new show. He goes, if you can find me in Harvard Square, I'm at the bookstores, I'll be on your show. I'm like, what? We're going to go follow this guy in Harvard Square. I called his father up. I said, where's Marty? He goes, he's at the Holiday Inn. I said, thank you. So we go to the Hard Rock Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
The late manager, Teo, what a great guy. He goes, Joe, I'm sorry. We can't let you tape because the Hard Rock, there's some whole problem legally with Hard Rock was owned half of this side of the Mississippi, the other side, and they had to go through each other for all this crazy legal stuff.
Uh-huh.
He goes, but do it at the hotel, and I want to be there. I said, Teo, you're invited. So there was Teo, me, Jason Brabazon, and the Marty Ballin interview I did for the TV show is on that DVD I put out, Marty Ballin Live on the Esplanade. And it was a fascinating, I knew Marty for years. I knew him since 86. So, we're talking 10 years later, 10 years after, if you will. I'm in a hotel room with him, and we're doing this interview, and it's a really great interview. Marty, I said, Miracles, one of the greatest record productions of all time. How did you do it? He said, how we always recorded, Joe. We walk in, we turned everything on, and we just played.
Nice.
That is such an impeccable, beautiful recording, don't you think? Miracles.
Oh, of course. That's a masterpiece.
You can't say enough about it, and they're just so professional. They waltz in and record, and they come out with magic.
Now, you've interviewed quite a few people throughout your career. I mean, who was the most interesting person that you've spoken to? Any cool stories?
Oh, I've interviewed like 1,000 people. So if you go, Bobby Hebb, Doris Troy, Just One Look.
Mm-hmm.
These people are amazing. Buzzy Linhart, Zemeckis. Go down the list. Margaret Cho, she's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Gilbert Gottfried, Gallagher. These comedians, they have a lot of intensity, and they're very smart people.
Mm-hmm.
As are all of these individuals. You don't get to that level without being very smart. But Mark Fonner from Grand Funk Railroad.
Oh, he's
Don
great.
Brewer.
Mm-hmm.
These people are amazing. And just being able to talk about their recordings, they get the vibe that you have studied them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that they're genuinely interested. Here's a great story. Three Dog Night.
Okay.
We got it in Goldmine Magazine because Joe Tortelli wrote for Goldmine and Discoveries. We went to high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw Floyd Sneed going in the restaurant. I saw Floyd Sneed across the street from the Bradford Ballroom. They did this brilliant night at the Bradford, better than when they were at the Boston Garden in '73 with T-Rex, because I saw that show. But this Bradford Ballroom show was really special. And I said, hey, Floyd, we'd love to interview you. He brings us to the table. Oh, the Bear and Ale, something like that was the name of the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys loved talking to us. They made them stay open. They wanted to shut down the restaurant. And they said, no, we're having fun with these guys. And it was one of the interviews of the decade in Goldmine. Our Three Dog Night interview was intense. But Jimmy, that's just like a random, we were looking for them. Yeah, I bump into the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he brings us to the table again, the Bridge of Incidents, right? And there's Melody Tarbox and Joe Tortelli and we're hanging out with Three Dog Night getting these magnificent stories. They knew how much we were into them. And Corey Wells stayed in touch with me over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So, meeting Mary Wilson of the Supremes and all these people that we admire, you find out that they're the genuine article. You love their records because they actually have a clue.
Right.
People were brilliant.
Now, have you ever met anybody that you didn't like? Or you'd rather not say?
Well, no, I'm a historian. I'm a documentarian. So Al Cooper lives in Somerville.
Okay.
Which is like the next city over from me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he said to me, I only did this because you're friends with Jeff Tamarkin. Jeff Tamarkin's our editor over at Goldmine, and you must know Jeff. He's been around forever, right?
I've heard of him.
So Cooper's like, are you friends with Jeff Tamarkin? So I'll do the interview. And I had a staff setting up everything. So I show up. He goes, you're late. I'm like, I'm not late, but if you think I'm late, Al, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the station manager goes, throw him off. I don't like his attitude. Throw him right off the stage on camera. I said, I'm not going to do that to Al Cooper. So we're on stage, and I said, so this is your book is kind of a second volume of your first book. He goes, truncated. I'm getting one-word answers out of him. So I'm like, okay, one-word answers are not going to fly. And he's not even selling his own book. What do I do with Al Cooper? I said, what does Al Cooper do for a good time?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want me saying this now, but he said it on camera, so I'm going to go. He goes, I'm Anne Frank with a satellite dish.
Okay.
Oh, what movies does Al Cooper like? Bingo, hit it. Now he starts talking movies. Now we're having a great conversation. It was awesome.
Uh-huh.
But the station manager didn't like him, but he didn't have taste anyways, right? Al Cooper's this genius. He's guy playing on like a Rolling Stone and can't always get what you want. This is the real deal. All of his great work, all of his solo albums. So I got Al Cooper to speak, but it wasn't what you would expect. And you know what, Jimmy, you do great interviews. I love your work.
Well, thank you.
Sincerely. I had some real estate guy on in Winthrop,
Mm-hmm.
and he's trying to do an infomercial on my show. And I'm like, no, man. We don't talk real estate. We talk about your life. I want to know all about you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Joe, I go golfing in South America, and if you go into the rough, you're with the lions and tigers and bears. And all of a sudden, I clicked him into a whole different mindset. He goes home and writes me a note, the best interview I've ever done in my life. Well, We're not talking real estate. We're talking about your life. I want to know. The whole reason I started the magazine at 15, Jimmy, was to go walk up to people on the street and interview common people,
Right.
which they do today, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in 69, no one was doing it, and I'm just 15 years old, but this is how my brain worked, right?
Right.
But instead of getting common people, God gave me all these famous people, and it's just kind of like, I get to meet Alfred, but I get the Maisels brothers thing, and it's like, whoa. I guess if you really love something, it kind of comes to you.
I've never had anybody on that I didn't like, but I did have people on that, wow, it was like pulling teeth, like to get them to warm up. And once they warm up, then it was magic.
And I love every one of the people that give me the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
There was one fellow who wrote a book, and he was a horrible interview.
Mm-hmm.
And there's colleagues of mine that can't do an interview. And they're brilliant people, but they just freeze in front of the mic, and they're DJs. And I filled in for a guy, and a woman was going to open her mouth and say, "Oh, this is a great interview." And I said, "Please, we're on the air. Have a lot of respect for our friend." And we moved on. But she was like, this guy was great. He was a great music director. He did a phenomenal job, but it would be like, "Jimmy, what's your next gig?" The same. That was his first question all the time. And he was he wasn't skilled at interviews. He was skilled at he could put a playlist better than I.
Wow.
He was great, but he wasn't functioning as an interviewer.
Yeah.
So it's a funny field we're in, because you and I do it because we're passionate. We
Right.
want to know. We want to get the story.
We want the story. We want to help the artists promote their music. We want to share the music and the story behind the music and all that good stuff. And I'm not even sure how we know each other, other than I think you sent me a message on through my website.
I did.
About some of your artists, and then we went from there. I mean, today is the actual first time we actually spoke together. Which
it was Bobby Hebb's daughter.
Yes.
I wanted to push Bobby Hebb's daughter to you.
Yeah. Oh, she's a magnificent, lovely woman.
And you and your wife were watching the Peloton commercial?
Yeah, and we heard the song Sunny, and I'm like, oh, wow. And it's like, and then all of a sudden, like, I get an email from you saying, would you be interested in having Katoto on the program? I was like, wow. I'm like, this is freaky, you know?
It's the bridge of incidents.
Yeah, and then, of course, you sent Pamela my way, Pamela Ruby Russell, and she's a lovely woman. Love chatting with her.
It's fascinating. There's so much to her, Woodstock, and so much.
Oh, yeah.
Been around,
and Dave.
She's been around famous people she couldn't talk to you about.
Right, and Dave was great. You know.
Oh, God, well, yeah. We go back 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean.
That's the beauty of it.
And IPD was great, too.
He's fascinating, too. These fellows from Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Jamaican connection because I worked for Negrel West Records.
Uh-huh.
And they flew myself and Raquel Reynolds to the Billboard Billboard Convention in Georgia, in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
And that was like 12, 13 years ago. And Raquel and she sends me artists from Jamaica. That's how I get IPD Green.
Yep.
She's a Jamaican publicist.
Very cool. Greg Paquette was good, too. Greg was cool, too.
Oh, Greg is
Paquette?
Really smart. Yeah.
And
he had a record deal, and he doesn't like talking about it, and I like talking about it. The guy, got to that level.
Mm-hmm.
But he's doing a new album now.
Oh, very cool. I can't wait to hear it. And you know who else was really cool? Kelly was great. Kay Britz.
Now, Kelly is the wife of Rob Fraboni.
Yeah, and he was another great guest that was on the program.
And you know how I met him, right?
Through the Keith Richards project, right?
That was fascinating. So Jimmy Miller produced the Rolling Stones.
Uh-huh.
And he had produced Johnny Thunders of the New York Dolls.
Mm-hmm.
And I was A&R for New Rose Records. I was their first album artist ever, like in 1978. So now I'm the A&R guy in 83.
Mm-hmm.
No one would sign Johnny Thunders. No one wanted him. He'd spit in an A&R man's face in America. And despite the legacy of the Dolls, he really had put himself on the outs. So they came to me. The band The Daughters had backed him up. and Jimmy Miller produced. I said, I'll sign him to New Rose, but I got to meet the great Jimmy Miller. And I go to Euphoria Studios, and it's the Count. I must meet the Count. And they call me Count Viglione, right? And it's like, here's my hero, the guy that made these, Jumpin' Jack Flash. And I'm getting to meet Jimmy Miller, and within 2 or 3 weeks, we signed an agreement, and I was representing him.
That's awesome.
So in 1988, he goes, Keith is recording in New York. Let's go. And so I think he brought his son with him, Michael Miller.
Uh-huh.
And we went to this little recording studio where there was Keith Richards and Rob Fraboni. Keith is such a gentleman. He goes, Joe, you must meet Rob Fraboni. Talking to me like he's known me forever, right? I've just met this guy.
Right.
And he's one of my heroes. And he's like, just a regular dude. You've got to meet Rob Fraboni. We shook hands. We hung out. And the next thing I know, Rob and I are hanging out together. I brought him to Boston to hear Jay Giles. And Jay Giles signed with Francesca Records, but I was going to have Rob sign him to his label.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob and I started doing business, and here we are. We're really close. I want you to do I'm going to ask you politely to interview Rob again, part 2.
I would love to. I got a good hour out of him. I'd love to get another maybe hour out of him. That would be cool,
He's in the Midwest right now recording an album because I have 2 albums for him to master, and he won't be back till this Friday or Saturday. So, but we're in touch by text. But yeah, that would be awesome because I would love to send you questions for him because there's so much to this guy, and people generally ask the same old questions. Oh, hello, old friend, Eric Clapton, right?
Right.
And that kind of stuff. And Martin Scorsese always gets talked about with the that band movie.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much to Rob about making, building recording studios and going on that flight with Bob Dylan and David Geffen and all that cool stuff. I don't know if we covered that, but there's a lot of real in-depth Fraboni stuff we need to get on tape.
Yeah, he was telling me a story, too, about how he met Gordon Lightfoot. And when he was I guess they were at Gordon's house or something like that, Gordon was playing his own music. I thought that was pretty funny.
Jimmy Miller had a great story. Since he's not around, I guess I'll tell it. He's going to, they're negotiating for him to produce Van Morrison.
Okay.
So Jimmy goes to the airport, drives to the airport. He's going to pick up Van Morrison. And he goes, there's the short, fat, bald roadie, Joe. And I get to the roadie, and we're walking. He goes, when do I get to meet Van? And he goes, I am Van. And Jimmy said it was all downhill from there. So that never happened.
That's funny, man. So out of, you started out with a magazine, then you went to a label. Who was the first artist that you signed on your label?
Well, I always start with me. I'm the experiment, so if it goes bad, no one gets mad at me, right?
Okay.
The second was Paul Lovell, one of the editors of the Boston Grouping News, still around. It's been around for 50 years, and he is a comedian.
Okay.
And he was getting his bits played on WMBR in Cambridge, which is now WTVS, MIT. So I put some of his stuff out, and it's very collectible, very rare record now, Blowfish in the New Wave. Because Paul Lovell is Blowfish.
Wow.
I'm the Count. We in Boston Rock and Roll have all these handles, which the bands today don't have, but everyone remembers our old handles, the people in the club, right?
Mm-hmm.
The club being the scene. And Blowfish in the New Wave, it's perfect. 4 different colors on the covers. It's a collectible. It's worth a lot of money if you can find it.
I'm going to have to look into that. Maybe I can get a copy of that.
So we would just put records out. We just, there weren't contracts. There weren't publishing deals. We were just having fun putting records out, getting press. And like, oh, look, my record's the best record of the month in Belgium, L'Attendant magazine or something. And, the guy who became Joe Perry's lead singer, Mark Bell. Mark Bell's a dear friend of mine, and he sends it to me from the Netherlands. It's like, this is wild. Program director sends me 5 crazy geniuses of rock and roll from France. And it was like Phil Spector, Captain Beefheart, Joe Viglione. You got to be kidding me, right? I'm one of the crazy geniuses of rock and roll with Phil Spector. You're kidding.
That's amazing.
So we just were putting records out, and we got traction, and we weren't selling records. We were promoting records.
Mm-hmm.
Selling is too difficult. Now, Rick Hart, a colleague of mine, he has a label in Boston, Ace of Hearts. He got in the Manchurian Candidate with Mission in Burma. I used to play with them back in the 70s, and it gets in the Manchurian Candidate. And he calls me up. He says, Joe, all this work we did going to record stores, getting nickels and dimes. He said, I've never seen so much money as when we got a Manchurian Candidate. And basically, we did it all wrong, Jimmy. We were doing it for the fun when we should have been pushing to the music supervisor, sync licensing, right?
Yeah.
But I can say that at my age, 50 years ago, we were having fun.
The music business, the way it's put out there now, it's totally different from back, when you started out. I mean, a lot's changed, right?
Well, the record industry killed itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a very good example. If you could sell 50,000 records right now, they'd love you.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you could sell 50,000 physical copies. So I've got Buddy Guy. This is 1986, 1987. And you got Jimmy Miller and Joe Viglione producing Buddy Guy. I'm producing Nils Lofgren, Springsteen's
guitar player.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Nils is like, Joe, no one ever lets me play the blues. I said, well, my partner's in New York, Jimmy Miller. Do you mind if I just handle the session without me? He goes, Joe, no one lets me play the blues. I love it. So Nils is like absolutely amazing in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see where I'm going about the record labels. So his wife is there. I said, I produced Nils in 1973 when I was in college. I hand her the concert tape I made at the Orpheum. She goes, he's going to love it. He didn't tape that tour. So it was just amazing. And he's doing this stuff in the studio. The Lee Michaels tune. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a great one.
I chose that one. And Michael Barrickman at Capitol said, what a great idea. And Jimmy Miller loved it too. So I took out one of the verses and had Nils Lofgren play a solo. He does this ascending line and then a descending line and two different takes. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, Nils. I'm going to splice them. He goes, don't splice them. What do you want? I told him exactly what I wanted. I've never seen a guitarist do this. He did the exact notes I wanted. He said, erase one. I'm like, I don't want to erase a Nils Lofgren tape, right? And he goes, erase it. Watch. He did the thing, what he did. I took the elements of what he composed, and I wanted it fused, and he did exactly what I wanted, note for note. He's the guy stunning.
Wow.
Then we had a limo driver, and so we took him from limo. Ed Durkazarian loved rock and roll, so we get free limo drives everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Miller and I drove in style. It was awesome. We take Nils down to Rhode Island. I'm asking about working with Lou Reed. He goes, oh, Bob Ezrin put me together with Lou Reed, and we started writing some. And, Lou's my hero, and I'm talking to Nils about Lou and the limo. So much fun, Jimmy.
Oh, I'm sure.
My point about the record label. So an A&R man, a lawyer, I trust him. He does very good work. At one of the labels, I said, what is wrong with these people? I got signed signatures from Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, Carlos Santana. They all want to be on Buddy's record. We got a thick packet. Because I was working with Joe Perry's first wife,
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa. His second wife was my graphic artist. Joe can't get away from me. I love Joe. He's awesome. But I worked with his first and second wives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Alyssa got us through Rabbit of Aerosmith. Rabbit was a roadie, got us the Buddy Guy connection. And we got all these letters, and we got offered, one offer we got from what's now Sony for $15,000. And I'm like, I spent $25,000 already. He goes, we know you have an investor.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to fly over to England and get Eric Clapton on it. And we had permission from Warner Brothers for Clapton. And that was a work of art, Jimmy. Warner Brothers did not want, if it went on Columbia, Warner Brothers did not want Clapton on Columbia. And Jimmy Miller's on the phone, and I'm listening. And he's like, I'm listening in the kitchen. I'm not listening on the phone. And Jimmy said to the fellow at Warner Brothers, you're going to stand in the way of important art? And they signed the document, and we had Clapton and all these people, and we couldn't get more than $15,000. So I call the A&R man. I go, this is at another label where I wanted Buddy.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Joe, it's insane. They all want 3-4 million copies. And I said, it's going to sell 50,000 minimum. And what happened? That album is not out. I have that on the vaults, Jimmy.
Wow.
I have this amazing record with Joe Perry. We only got Joe Perry, Nils Lofgren, and Genya Raven on it. And Buddy Guy, of course. I was going to have Bobby Hebb sing on it. He passed.
Mm-hmm.
But we have this amazing album of Buddy Guy that's never been released. And the A&R guy said they're all crazy. They all want 3, 4, 5 million units. And Buddy Guy wasn't going to do that. What happened, though? The next album, he won the Grammy. Damn Right I Got the Blues.
Wow.
We would have had a Grammy-winning record. I mean, Jimmy Miller, Buddy Guy, Joe Perry, give me a break, right? And it's magic. Let me tell you, it is a magic record.
I'm sure. Now, you were an A&R guy yourself, right?
For these labels like CD Review Magazine, remember them?
Mm-hmm.
So Wayne Green, dear friend of mine, he died in his 90s, really sweet guy. I was his A&R man, so I brought in Spirit. I Got a Line on You.
Mm-hmm.
And here's some of the fun, Jimmy, right? So, like, Randy was in love with Sarah Fleetwood, Mick Fleetwood's wife.
Uh-huh.
And they do Nature's Way, a duet. And Sarah Fleetwood's calling me on the phone. Hi, Joe, it's Sarah. I'm driving down the mountain way or whatever. And it's like, I get these cool phone calls, right? Jackie DeShannon calling me up. Joe, I want to buy you my new records. And I'm like, Jackie, you're not buying me your records. Who put it out? She gave me the label. I wrote to them. They sent them. She goes, you're amazing. But like getting phone calls from Jackie DeShannon, Sarah Fleetwood. When Jimmy was at the house, Dick Asher, the president of Polygram, would call.
Mm-hmm.
All these cool people calling. Jack Bruce from Cream. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Jack Bruce on the phone. It's like, the fan in me comes out. But I'm very professional. But inside, they don't know that my heart's fluttering. It's like, I got Jack Bruce on the phone.
Right.
And then Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce were at the Paradise, and Ginger comes up to me, and he remembered me, and it's like, wow, this is like Jimmy to us, right? Hanging out with Marianne Faithfull and Steve Winwood and having dinner, right?
Right.
It's just magic.
That's awesome.
So the record labels, the long story I just gave you is that the record labels just destroyed the industry. They wanted accountants and lawyers to run it. I mean, I could tell you story after story.
Yeah.
Dirty Dancing. Can I tell you the Dirty Dancing story?
Sure. I'd love to hear that.
We're in Wendy Goldstein's office. We're pitching Boston bands. And Wendy's like, we got this record, Dirty Dancing, and our warehouses are empty.
Uh-huh.
We have the other major labels pressing for us. So this is just when it hit. They had no idea what kind of a soundtrack they had. And it flew out the door. And hearing this stuff from these executives and hearing how the industry is working, they didn't even know they had a hit on their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And they were caught short, and they had they've had two or three sequels now to the Dirty Dancing soundtrack, but they had no idea what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And the famous word is no, because if you say no, you're not losing money.
Of course.
So say no to the Beatles, say no to the band Boston. Meatloaf couldn't get arrested, right?
Right.
They all said no to him. What was it? Cleveland International put him out. They don't have ears, Jimmy. You have ears. I have ears. They don't have ears. I knew, Michael Johnson produced the New Kids on the Block. His brother's Maurice Starr.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the Johnson group. He comes up to me, shakes my hand, he goes, everybody loves Buddy. No one wanted to know about Buddy but Joe Vig. He goes, everybody loves Buddy now. He was very impressive. Buddy was doing 200 people. I knew we had a superstar on our hands. How could you not?
I know.
I'm not psychic. This is just obvious.
You have good ears.
Yeah, but you knew Buddy Guy would be a monster.
Of course.
And we're talking 1986. He'd been a monster in the 60s.
Exactly.
They just don't get it. They don't look for art. They're looking for manufacturing.
Yep.
They're looking for the Dirty Dancing, and they didn't even know they had it. But Fraboni's got great ears.
Oh, yeah, he definitely does. And I'm looking at this timeline that you gave me. 92, he hired you, right?
He hired me for a couple of companies. 92 was, that was magnificent. That was Domino Records.
Uh-huh.
So we had the Alvin Lee, one of my great, great heroes, Alvin Lee. I'm driving Alvin Lee around. You're kidding me, right? And George Harrison was on the record. They lived on the Thames, so George would just come over and lay tracks down for Alvin, right? I'm promoting George.
Uh-huh.
And through Peter Noon, I got to email George Harrison and hook him up with Bobby Hebb, because Bobby toured with George, and Bobby and George are corresponding, and George is corresponding with me about Bobby Hebb. And it's like, I promoted you with Alvin Lee, and magic. It's just magic, Jimmy. And so the Domino Records, they wanted me be the head promo guy, but I didn't want to move to New York. Arnie Goodman and Paul over there. But, boy, I worked very hard for Alvin Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And Lois Kennedy from Geffen Records had the keys to the Capitol Records PR department in Woburn, Mass, right near my P.O. box, right, half a mile from my P.O. box. So we're in there doing all the Alvin Lee promo in the middle of the night, right? Using the fax machines at Capitol. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Fun days. And it was, Alvin said to me, best promo stop of the country. I knew it, but to have, Alvin Lee, one of my favorite guitarists, telling me this, just such a nice guy. Fun stuff. And that's thanks to Fraboni. I got to promote Rusty Kershaw with Neil Young on it.
That's awesome.
Fraboni's in a whole other league, and to him it's just business, right? It's like, he loves these guys, but I'm saying it's like, okay, here's my record with Ivan Neville and Russ, and who was it? John Mooney and Ivan Neville, and he produced Rusty Kershaw with Neil Young, and I'm getting to promote this stuff from Fraboni. Amazing. We never even saw Rob in the office. I see Rob more now than when I was working for him.
Wow.
We never see Rob. He was off doing work. He was off doing albums.
That's going to do it for part 1 of this interview. Stay tuned and listen to episode number 147 to hear the conclusion of this interview.